accompaniment. All right, let's go to 1 Kings 20. Kind of covering some of the chapters that I wasn't able to go over in the Elijah study in Kansas City. I know you're not hearing any of those really, but just kind of felt weird just skipping these chapters, and they're great chapters, and so I've gone back and looked over them. Now, I'm not really going to preach so much this chapter, or really, again, just kind of like this morning, I just got one particular phrase in that. Sometimes phrases kind of jump out at me, and then I want to just consider that and talk about that a little bit. So we probably won't be here super long tonight. All right. But let's go ahead and go to 1 Kings 20. And let me see here. So this is a great story. I've preached this before a couple times. I think once here and once in Kansas City, and probably maybe twice here. I'm not sure. But you know, one of the things that we remember about this one that I've dwelt on a lot is the fact that the prophet here towards the end, you know, you remember where he smites the man, the prophet tells the guy to smite him, and he doesn't. And so, like, he says, hey, because the prophet said smite and you didn't do it, you're going to get eaten by a bear or whatever it is. We're not going to focus on all that. But the thing is, you know, it was a lion, not a bear, sorry. It's crazy to think about what prophets had to do back in Bible days, some of the crazy things that they had to do, and this was one of them. It's a great message. I've preached that. The chapter's great. Enjoyed reading it again, but I want to particularly go to some events leading up to this, and what happens is the Israelites are, I'm trying to get all the characters' names here, I'm sorry. Ben-Hadad is the king there, and he's wanting to go up against the children of Israel. And when it starts out, he's like, you know, he's kind of taking over. Ahab is kind of wimping out a little bit and saying, hey, I don't stand a chance against this guy. And so he's submitting to him, and he's like, hey, whatever you want, we'll give it to you. And Ben-Hadad says, okay, well, I mean, you know how it is. You give somebody an inch, they want a mile. And so he's like, okay, you know what? I know I said this is all we want is such and such. He said, but you know, when instead we're going to come in there and my people can just take whatever they want. And basically it became obvious that, hey, this guy is just in to just totally destroy us and totally take over. And so he got a council together with the men, and the men said, you know what, let's not hearken to him. Let's just go seek the Lord and fight this battle. So they end up having a battle, and God says, don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. And so the king of Syria there, Ben-Hadad, is very surprised when they go to war and they get totally whipped by Israel. And so look at verse 22. And the prophet came to the king of Israel and said unto him, go strengthen thyself and mark and see what thou doest, for at the return of the year the king of Syria will come up against thee. All right, so he's telling him, hey, be prepared. You know, don't just get so comfortable because you won this battle. They're going to come back and they're going to fight you again. In verse 23, and the servants of the king of Syria said unto him, their gods are gods of the hills. Therefore, they were stronger than we, but let us fight against them in the plain, and surely we will be stronger than they. So, you have to realize that in that day, in fact, most of the Bible, there were people who were kind of like polytheists. They had lots of different gods, and sometimes they would recognize their God, like different Philistine gods, according to the territory, the place where they were, Or maybe it would be like, hey, the God of this water, this river here, something like that. And so they were very much like that. And so they would look at Israel like, okay, well, that's Israel's God, but our God. And it's not that they didn't deny that Israel's God was a God, but they had their own God. And it's really weird to read that sometimes because it's so different from us. But here recently we're going through the different continents and our missions, focus on world missions, and we were talking about the different continents and all these indigenous groups. That's pretty much how they were. Like they had the God of the, this particular territory, this region, this body of water or whatever, and they attributed different gods to all those things. So that's what these people try to do is the Syrians there say, well, here's why they beat us in the war. Because their God is the God of the hills. So what we need to do is get them out into the plain, into the valley, and fight them there. Then we'll surely win. All right? And so I want to preach this message on the God of the valleys. Now, instantly, I'm sure if you've ever heard the song it made you think about, the Dart song that says, the God of the mountains is still God of the valleys. Okay? And the God of the day is God of the night. God of the good times is God of the bad times. We understand the song, and the point that he's trying to make is hey, when you're up on the mountain, everything is great, and you're like, oh, God is good. But when you're down in the valley, boy, that's a lot more difficult. But you have to realize that God is still the God even of the valleys. Now, in this story, that's not really the case if you really break it down and think about it. The mountains, or the hills, if you will, the God of the hills, this was actually like a struggle. Like this was a hard fight. This was a difficult battle. And so, for instance, you think about all these famous wars that were fought on a hill, and usually the idea is to get the top ground, like to get the higher ground, and you have the advantage, particularly in warfare back then where it was like, hey, a lot of stuff was throwing off, and whether you're on a big castle or you're on a big hill or whatever, you have the upper ground. You've got a tactical advantage, and you can win the war more likely. Okay, so what we see is up on this hill, the Israelites are fighting, and they don't necessarily have the upper ground. It's just they're fighting in this situation, and surprise, surprise, they win. And so the people are, wow, their gods must be the gods of the hills. Okay, and so actually it's kind of the opposite of how the song goes, that these guys are saying, well, let's go get them out in the field where it's a lot easier and we can win. Now, if you're just, lining up, comparing, apples to apples, but they just beat you in a difficult war, in a difficult situation on the hills. It should be when they get out to the valley where it's easier, they'll be able to do more damage. Except for the fact that they were discounting the strength that they had through God. They were just counting the numbers and trying to figure out, I don't understand. We shouldn't have lost that. But there's no way we could lose when we're out there. And of course, we look at this story and we understand, hey, if God says you're going to win the war, you're going to win the war no matter how many people you have or what your weapons are or anything like that. And so in this story, we get this idea that actually the mountain is the bad thing. And it kind of reminds me of another illustration here, Matthew 5:45. This is another thing that people often do. Let's go to Matthew 5, verse 45. That ye may be children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. And I've often heard that told in the sense that, hey, it's God gives sunshine and everything is great, but then sometimes the rain comes and the rain is the bad thing. But actually, if you think about it, rain is always the blessing because that's when the crops are going to grow and everybody's wanting the rain. And it's in times of drought when there is no rain, that's actually the hard times. So sometimes we don't really think about that when we're thinking about the God of the mountains and the God of the valleys. But the point that I want to make in this sermon is this. The God of, this is completely opposite of that song, all right? The God of the hard times is still God in the good times, okay? And the truth of the matter is, a lot of times in the difficult times in our life, that's when we're the most spiritual minded. And we're the most, in contact or in connection with our spiritual side and in our relationship with the Lord because we're calling out to Him, we're seeking His face, we're forgetting about all of the things that we like and the comforts and all that kind of stuff. And so it's in those times, a lot of times, where we spiritually thrive during hardship, during tests and trials. And no one likes it, and a lot of, it might weed out the people that can't handle it, but that is a lot of times when people or Christians or churches, they thrive in those times. Families thrive. A lot of times people have gotten stronger, like marriages. When people are on the brink of divorce, sometimes that causes them to seek out some counsel and seek out things and maybe start going to church. And I've seen that happen lots of times where families actually come out of that and start serving the Lord. And it was like, man, we had such a rough time right there that it caused us to turn to God and call out to God. Lots of illustrations that we could probably think and point to in that way. But actually the difficult part in the Christian life is remaining faithful to the Lord and remaining in constant communion with Him when things are actually easy and great and you got prosperity and you got blessings and everything's going right. If you think about it, that is actually when it's hardest to be a Christian. And a lot of people wouldn't think that. They'd be like, oh, you don't understand. We got resources, you got more prosperity, you can give more to the church and you can do all those kinds of things. Well, statistics show when people have everything met, it's a lot difficult. All their needs are met. It's a lot difficult for them to keep following the Lord because they have this attitude, hey, I've made it. I'm comfortable. I got what I need. And something inside, I guess, kind of attributes that to yourself, and it forgets that God's actually the one that allowed you to have that. And so I think it's important for us from time to time to consider that the God of the mountains is still God in the valleys, or the God in the valleys is still God. The God in the mountains, which is the hard fight, is still God in the valleys whenever things are a lot easier. Okay, a little bit different than how the song goes. Now, the first point I want to make, there's just 2 points. What do we do in the easy times, the good times, if you will, okay? And I want to focus on this for a second. So here's a saying, I don't know where it came from. It's an old saying that's been around for a long time, but it makes a lot of sense, and it's very good advice. And I'm going to show you that it's biblical advice as well, okay? Number 1, in time of peace, who knows the rest of that? Anybody? In time of peace, prepare for war. Okay, is how the saying goes. In time of peace, prepare for war. Let's look at the example of King Asa, 2 Chronicles 14. 2 Chronicles 14. Let's just start reading verse 1 there. So Abijah slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa his son reigned in his stead. In his days, the land was quiet 10 years. Quiet is another way of saying it was at peace. There was no war. Everything was going great. So it was quiet for 10 years. Now, other places you'll see where, hey, they had rest, or there was no, we just read this morning where Ahab, now they had peace for 3 years, or whatever length of time these countries, these nations would have a time of peace and rest. Okay, and in his case it was 10 years. And it says in verse 2, and Asa did that which was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God, for he took away the altars of the strange gods and the high places, and brake down the images and cut down the groves. and commanded Judah to seek the Lord God of their fathers, and to do the law and the commandments. Also, he took away out of all the cities of Judah the high places. It's so funny that so many times the king is like, well, he did that which was right, but there was still worshiping allowed in the high places. Like, that was a big deal. Here Asa says he even went so far as to take away out of the city the high places and the images, and the kingdom was quiet before him. And here's what he did in his quiet time, in a time of peace in his nation. And he built fenced cities in Judah. Maybe Trump was on to something after all. For the land had rest, and he had no war in those years, because the Lord had given him rest. Therefore he said unto Judah, let us build these cities, and make about them walls and towers, gates and bars, while the land is yet before us, because we have sought the Lord our God, we have sought him, and he hath given us rest on every side. So they built and prospered. So you see there a case where for 10 years, like we know that the nations went up and down, and there was other leaders that came and they weren't so faithful. But for 10 years, this kingdom remained at peace. And during that time of peace, they said, you know what we ought to do? We ought to just go ahead, put walls up around the city, build our towers up. And the towers, were places where you could strategically put policemen to keep an eye on the city and lots of protection. They say, hey, let's build up our armies. Let's build up our forces and just be able to have what we need. Why? Because of the fact that even though they're in a time of peace, we know that war is just ahead, and so they want to go ahead and prepare for that. Look at Ephesians Chapter 6. In our own personal life, Ephesians 6, we understand that we're supposed to keep our eyes open. We're supposed to protect ourselves and put on the armor of God. And here's what it says, Ephesians 6, verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith we will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and take the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for the saints. And so what he said was we're supposed to take on the armor of God. Why? So that we might stand in the evil day. In other words, when that evil day comes, that we would be ready. I just watched something here recently where a guy, I was just talking about it to Brother Austin in Kansas City, because Brother Austin carries, we got a few different guys that carry, and so they've always got their weapon on them. And I was watching this thing where this guy had been carrying for 20-some years, and he had never been in a fight. He had never had to pull his gun, and definitely had never had to use it on somebody. Or he may have had to pull it before, I don't know, but he never used it on anybody. And if he ever had to pull it on somebody, he probably never did. I can't remember the whole story on that. But this guy had that gun the whole time. Well, he ends up getting into an altercation, and a guy pushes him down, and he gets up. Long story short, he ends up shooting the guy, and he ends up going to jail or going to prison because he shouldn't have shot the guy. The guy was backing up, and he was unarmed, and all that stuff. But I got to thinking about that, like guys that are constantly have a weapon on them, and they're going about day after day after day after day, and if it's the wrong kind of guy who's looking for a fight, looking for an opportunity, he's just like, hey, I'm getting bored. I wish I'd get some action. Somebody, But obviously that's not why people carry guns. They carry guns so that they're protected when the time comes where they actually have to use it, and they need to be prepared. Can you imagine if you had a gun, you're like, yeah, I keep that for protection, but you never had it on you, and then one day, here comes somebody with a gun, and they end up shooting you or shooting your family or whatever, and you're like, man, I wish I would have put my gun on today, but I left it at home because I didn't think I was going to need it. Why? Because everything's been at peace. There's been no struggle. There's been no harm. But the thing is, when everything's at peace, you have to keep in mind that, hey, there's going to be eventually an altercation. There's going to be some kind of war. So we've got to, in our spiritual life, be on the guard all the time. Have the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, all those things that are mentioned, and the Word of God, and be prepared. We've got to, always be realizing that Satan is just around the corner. Those fiery darts are going to come at us, and we've got to be on our guard. So in time of peace, prepare for war. Now the second point that I want to make, and this is just the last point here, we've got to know that our current situation, if we're talking about prosperity, time of peace, rest, or whatever, our current situation is fluid and it's temporary. Now, I guess somebody could end up going the rest of their life in peace, never have any problems spiritually speaking. The principalities of darkness and all, never mess with them. Flesh and blood is all that they have. They never have any problems. Maybe that's possible, but we should know that when everything is quiet, everything's good, that, hey, it's only temporary. It's only temporary. And I'm going to tell you what that does is that keeps you humble. And that helps you realize that, hey, it's only going to be a matter of time. There's a lady, I'm going to mention her Wednesday in the message, but I can't remember her name off the bat. But there's this lady who is an ultramarathon runner. And now you guys think I'm crazy for even attempting or wanting to do 100 miles, even though I've actually only completed one and I don't do them very often. But there are people out there that do multi-day races where they're just like, some of them are through deserts and mountains and all this kind of stuff. And there's this lady that got very, very popular in the last maybe 10 years or so. And one of the reasons she's so popular is because you would never think she could be an ultra runner. She just got who actually reminds me of Lizzie? I guess Lizzie Parker now is her name. And it used to be Elizabeth Wilson. And so anyway, she's got kind of that build. She's just, she's not a big lady at all. She's not and one of the things that made me think about Lizzie is that Lizzie would have these, skirts that were made out of like basketball shorts. And that's what this lady wears when she goes running. Everyone else is wearing these fancy running clothes and stuff like that. She would have these long basketball shorts and a baggy shirt and like a water bottle in her hand. And so when she stepped up to the line of a 100-mile race or whatever, and there's all these big people and muscular and all this stuff, and you would never guess that she would be able to do that. But anyway, so I was watching this. Sometimes I'll listen to different podcasts and stuff like that when I'm cleaning, and I happened to come across something that interviewed her, and she's a ultra runner that I enjoy following because of the fact that she's very humble and everything. And I was listening to this podcast, and these guys are just going off because they just love the ultra running community, and this is like their hero, and they're just like, whoa, what is it like to have just instant fame, and everywhere you go, people know your name, which people don't really know ultra runners' names very much, but in the ultra running world they do. And so if they would go to this big popular race like in Europe or something like that, France, there's some really well-known ultra marathon races. Everybody knew who she was. She's getting all the fan mail. She's got all the sponsors and stuff like that. And you're like, what is it like? And she, I believe sincerely, as humbly as she can, was like, I try not to think of it like that at all, because she said, my 15 minutes of fame is just going to pass like that. She's like, this is just very temporary. And I thought that was the most humble thing you could say, because some people let fame or power or whatever it is just kind of rise to their head, and they think like, man, I'm the greatest, And then what happens a few years from now, whenever you're out of the spotlight, they end up getting into trouble or who knows what, because they were so focused on, oh man, what happened? I lost what I once had. You see that with a lot of movie stars. From maybe the 50s and the 60s, and then something happened and they're just no longer famous, nobody knows who they are, and they kind of like live the rest of their life just depressed because, hey, I once was a movie star and now nobody knows who I am. And it's the reality sets in that, hey, the world just, enjoys you for a small amount of time. Whatever you think that your prosperity is or your 15 minutes of fame, it's just temporary. And your situation is so fluid, it could change overnight. There's no matter how much security I had financially, security I had with just family, friends, everything's going well, no tension, no problems, or whatever. Look, all it would take is one incident, and my whole world would just flip upside down, and everything would be completely different. And you've got to be willing to be ready for that. And you've got to be on your guard, and you've got to be, prepared for the worst things to happen. Look at Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12, verse 18. So this is, we'll back up a little bit farther than that actually. This is a popular story. Let's start with 13 and get a running start here. And one of the company said unto him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. And he said unto him, Man, who made me a judge or a divider over you? And he said unto them, Take heed and beware of covetousness. For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. And he spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? And he said, This will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall these things be, with which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich towards God. Okay, so in our life, we get to this point where we're like, hey, everything's going good. You know what? I'm just going to keep on living the luxury type of a life and just take everything that I can get. Okay, well, the Bible actually shows us that is foolish thinking, and we ought not to think that way. I had another verse, and I'm not sure what I did with it. I guess I didn't write it down on here. So, thinking through in my head just some practical examples. Okay, this isn't super spiritual right here. Obviously, spiritual is most important, but here's some just simple practical solutions. Now, it's nice to be financially stable, right? It's nice for people to have a little cushion, have some money in the bank, and know I can breathe. You know, I've got money coming in and everything is great. But again, that's a fluid situation. It could change in a moment's notice. All right? So what are some things that you could do in a time of peace? Because let me tell you, I think our church is doing pretty well. Most people are in a stage of their life where they know how much money's coming in. They've learned how to relatively keep hold of their budget, and everything is going fine. But the majority of the people out there, and look, places, I guess everywhere. I was going to talk about Iola, but let's just face it, everywhere. There are people out there who just live in paycheck to paycheck, and all it's going to take is 1 week of something bad happening where they're just completely just bottomed out, then the stress kicks in, and then the depression, and some people, if they don't have the Lord or even if they do have the Lord, but they just allow that to overtake them, they even get suicidal or whatever, and it's just crazy. But the thing is, if a person realizes that, hey, tomorrow that could happen, then when it happens, it won't be quite as surprising, right? But here's what you can do in the meantime. Hey, your time of peace. What did Asa do? Asa said, hey, let's go ahead and take opportunity to build those walls. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about the guy that said, hey, I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger barns, and all he cared about was just hoarding this stuff. But he said, you know what I ought to do? Be wise and make it where in the future we won't have, we'll have more opportunity to protect ourselves and whatever. And so when a person is in a time of their life where they're financially stable, that's a good time to maybe build up some sort of a savings, So, hey, and I was just talking to somebody about church finances, and I said, hey, we get up to, $30,000 or whatever in the bank, you start feeling like, hey, man, we're doing pretty good. But man, one thing could just wipe that out like nothing. And he said, well, I heard advice one time that somebody said, I think it was like 13 months. I don't remember the exact time. They said something like 13 months is what a church ought to have set aside, where for 13 months, if they had to, they could pay every single bill that they pay for that amount of time and every bill. And I don't even know what that would add up to be honest with us. But look, isn't that wise to say, hey, we're going to go ahead and invest in a little bit? Investing is another thing you can do, but we're going to go ahead and set money aside and protect our funds or whatever, so that we, in the future when a hardship comes, we're prepared for that. Okay, that's logical. Now look, if somebody's struggling from paycheck to paycheck and they're hurting, they don't know. Hey, sometimes it's just a daily fight. You got to just keep on fighting that fight. Keep on doing the work, putting the time in. Don't be silly about spending all your money. Just prioritize. Like, these are the things I need in my life. First, I need to have this, and then I have to have that, and then just work and just live day by day and don't get stressed out about the future. But if you get to a point where you got a little bit of money in the bank, say, hey, I don't want to next week be like I was however many weeks ago, so let me put some measures into place to stop me from going there again. That's just common sense, okay? How about good health? A lot of people they take for granted the fact that, I have pretty good health. I don't have any problems. I'm not sick. I don't have, I'm not on any medication or anything like that. Well, that would probably be a good time to start a good exercise program, because you're realizing that, hey, I want to keep this. I don't want to later on be, looking back saying, boy, remember whenever I was healthy and I didn't have all these problems, So we ought to put that in place and say, you know what, now while I can do it, and I've got the ability to do it, and I know what I need to do, I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of my good health, get some exercise, get some preventative maintenance, and make sure that I can keep my health longer, because I know that it's just a matter of time before I lose that health. And then when you lose that, you're not freaking out because you realize that was a possibility. But even better if you say, hey, a good thing I was prepared for that, if you can be. Okay? Kind of like Paul says, I'm content with whatever state I am. I've learned how to, to do well in times of need, and do well when I have great prosperity. I totally paraphrase that. But here's another one, our liberty. This is a big deal. And I don't think we Americans really know. Like, some people talk a lot about it for sure, but I don't think we really realize how much liberty and freedom we have in the United States. And again, we could lose that in a minute. And you see more and more how fast it could happen, and the measures that are in place with the different censoring that's going on, and the attempts to force certain things or stop people from doing different things. So what do you do in times of liberty? Because, hey, it might not be here tomorrow. Well, while you have your liberty, you need to decide what you're going to do in the future, and where you're going to draw the line, and where you're going to stand when those freedoms come into question. Now, I just saw recently a meme on Facebook that had a picture of Thomas Jefferson on one side, and on the other side it had a picture of Joe Biden. And the quote from, some of y'all have seen it probably, the quote from Thomas Jefferson said, oh, I'm probably going to mess this up. It says, if you are willing to sacrifice your freedom for safety, I'm probably messing it up a little bit, anybody who is willing to sacrifice their freedom for safety is not worthy to have either, something along those lines. And then in the other page, this is a direct quote from Joe Biden, who said, this isn't about your freedom, this is about your safety. Right? So the idea is like, and many people have gone on record here of late saying, forget your freedom. This is about your safety. Exactly the opposite of what our forefathers said about freedom. If you're going to stand up for your freedom, you got to say, look, I'm not so concerned about my safety. I just want to protect my freedom. Now, whatever you feel on that, or, that's no big deal. But I'll tell you this, those people who are fighting for liberty, fighting for our freedom and all that kind of stuff, those people are going, and the only way that they're going to keep that is they continue to practice our freedom and our liberty, and they continue to fight for our rights and for our freedoms. And if we're not into that, if we're not on that fight, fine. But just rest assured that tomorrow you could lose all of that. And so I sure appreciate people that stand up for freedoms and our liberties, and they try to fight against that. So what we need to do in times of peace, the God of the valley, that's the easy part, right? We need to be thinking about what it's going to be like when or what it used to be like when we were fighting on the mountain, because that's whenever things were rough and we had to stand up for our freedoms, and we had to try to get, get to this time where we're at peace. Now, look, obviously, I never fought in war, and I certainly never fought in some of the major wars of throughout our history that gave us some of the freedom that we have now. But I sure don't want to take it for granted and end up having to live in a place with no freedom, no liberty. So finally, let me just wrap it up and say this. Obviously, much more important than these physical things would be our spiritual liberty. And in times where we don't have the test and the trials and the fiery darts of Satan, like the Bible talks about, and things in our life just seem to be going pretty well. What we need to do is make sure that we're armed, we've got on the whole armor of God, and we're ready for that time to come, because it could switch in a moment's notice, and we could have some things in our life that'll happen that will really try our Christianity. So the final thing to do, and this is what he said in Ephesians 6, after he talked about all, stand, doing all that you have to do to stand, and you're suited up with the armor. Then it says, and pray. Okay, the last thing we can always need to do to keep ourselves in tune and to keep ourselves ready, because that's what the Asa did, by the way. He was in tune with God. God told him, hey, don't worry, you're going to win this fight in the mountain. And so then when he's in the valley, hey, this should be an easy fight. No. He searched God and said, God, we need your strength. And God gave him the strength in the valley as well. Okay, so sometimes we think, oh boy, it sure would be easier to be a Christian if we had, more freedom, if we had everything in life just going well. Hey, it sure would be easier to give to the church if we had more money, and people think that way all the time, but the truth is, that's when it's the hardest to keep on doing the things you're supposed to do. Whenever you're fighting and you're just, really doing the battle in a difficult situation, boy, that was the hard part. And, that seemed to be the hard part, but you got through it and everything went well. Now that things are easy, it gets real easy just to forget that. And they could have easily lost the battle because of that. But he's the God in the difficult times, and he's still God in the easy times. And we need to remember that and not lose sight of that whenever things are going well and we think, hey, God, I can take it from here. You can't. You've got to keep trusting him. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I hope what I said made sense tonight, and we can apply this to ourselves, and we can prepare, because I feel like most of us are probably in a situation where we're pretty comfortable. We've had peace for a long time, and help us not to take that for granted, and to continue to arm ourselves, and to continue to be prepared, because we know that in a moment's notice everything could change, and we don't have those liberties and that and the peace and the comfort that we once had. Help us keep our eyes on you, and keep in prayer, and keep in constant conditioning and constant protection, Lord. I pray that you would just be able to help us through that. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.